Hello, welcome back. It all began with what seemed like just one Sunday away from the pulpit at first. No one gave it too much thought. Donnie Swaggart could have been traveling or taking a brief pause from preaching, but when another week passed and he still hadn't returned, people started to feel something was wrong. Regular churchgoers, those who rarely missed a service, sensed an unusual stillness. Social media became flooded with questions about his absence, and yet there was no word. No statement, only silence. That silence became more unsettling than anything else. The Swaggart family, typically transparent with their audience, remained quiet. Francis Swaggart didn't address it. Gabriel continued with services but seemed different, carefully avoiding any mention of his father. Donnie's familiar voice had vanished without explanation, and behind that silence, unease started to grow. Things inside the family weren't as calm as they tried to appear. Those close to them noticed subtle but telling signs. Debbie Swaggart, Donnie's wife, had been seen frequently at Baton Rouge General Medical Center looking tired and anxious. Whispers circulated that she hadn't been home in several nights. Opting to stay with Donnie, Gabriel, usually so confident during broadcasts, seemed distant. There were moments when his voice cracked or he seemed distracted, checking his phone as though waiting for news. Frances, who had always been the family's strong foundation, had stepped back from her public appearances too, raising even more concern. Their expressions, their behavior, it all pointed to something bigger unfolding quietly behind closed doors. The family was in the middle of a private storm, and the outside world was only beginning to sense its weight. As time passed, quiet bits of truth began to surface. Staff members who had been close to Donnie mentioned that he hadn't been himself. For months, he had been pushing through his preaching schedule but showing clear signs of wear. He would pause mid-sermon, his hands trembled slightly, and his once powerful stride had become more cautious. At the time, everyone thought it was just exhaustion, but in hindsight, it was clear he was fighting something much deeper. He had been canceling meetings, stepping back from events, all without much explanation. Donnie had been undergoing tests and quietly seeing doctors. He'd kept it from the public, even most of the staff, wanting to protect the people from worry and preserve his image of strength. To admit he was struggling felt like admitting defeat. And that wasn't something Donnie had ever been comfortable with. But then came the diagnosis. What had started as occasional fatigue had turned out to be the early stages of congestive heart failure. His heart wasn't functioning properly, and doctors warned that unless he slowed down and made serious changes, things would get worse. Debbie sat beside him in the hospital room, tears in her eyes as she held his hand. Donnie had always leaned on faith, believing God would carry him through, but this time, he had reached a breaking point. Doctors recommended immediate treatment, a step back from ministry, and possibly even surgery. But Donnie's first concern wasn't for himself, it was for the people. He worried about who would preach, about who would carry the message in his absence. It wasn't fear of death that held him, it was fear of letting people down. Despite that hesitation, his family pleaded with him to step back. Debbie reminded him of the life he could still live if he took care of himself. Gabriel urged him to think of the future, of the ministry that could continue if he stayed alive, and eventually, Donnie realized this wasn't a battle he could fight with passion alone. He couldn't outpreach his condition, and as much as it hurt, he needed to let go, at least for a while. One Sunday morning, everything came to a terrifying head. Debbie found Donnie unconscious in their bedroom. His breathing was faint, and panic gripped her as she called for help. Paramedics rushed him to the hospital, and the Swaggart family was thrown into a full-blown crisis. Gabriel abandoned his service prep to be at the hospital. Francis followed close behind. The mood was tense and emotional. Donnie's heart had taken too much, and the pressure of pushing through had caught up to him. At church, the service continued, but behind the scenes, everything had changed. The pressure to address the public grew too heavy. Gabriel finally went on air one Wednesday night and revealed the truth. Donnie had been hospitalized due to serious heart complications. Gabriel's voice shook as he thanked the congregation for their support and asked for prayers. He didn't give many medical details, but his tone said everything. This wasn't a small issue. This was serious, and it was clear the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Frances, the family matriarch who had always carried herself with strength, began to crumble in private. She had encouraged Donnie to keep preaching, believing that faith would carry him through, but now, watching him hooked up to machines, she was flooded with guilt. Had she pushed him too hard? Had she missed the signs? Debbie tried to comfort her, saying Donnie had made his own decisions, but Frances couldn't shake the weight of regret. Eventually, the full picture came out. Donnie had been sick far longer than anyone had known. He had kept it all to himself: appointments, medications, symptoms. Because he didn't want to worry anyone or seem weak, he had chosen silence, bearing the burden alone while continuing to show up for others, but that strength had come at a cost. When people looked back at his recent sermons, they saw them differently now. The pauses, the quiet moments, the strain, they weren't just signs of fatigue. They were signs of a man pushing through pain. Then, one day, from his hospital bed, Donnie asked Debbie to help him record a message. It wasn't a sermon, just a heartfelt note to those who had stood by him. His voice was soft but full of emotion as he thanked everyone for their prayers. He admitted how sick he had been and how hiding it had been one of the hardest parts. But more than that, he shared a message of faith and trust that even in weakness, God's strength remains. He said he would be stepping back from ministry, not forever, but for now, to rest, to heal, to live. And in that moment, those who loved him didn't see a man giving up, they saw a man choosing life.